the KCM Connect, and as usual, we are dealing with some pertinent issues going on around in our economy. And today we have an eminent professor with us from IIM Kashipur, Professor Vaibhav Bhamoria. So just to introduce him, he is a fellow of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. His total experience of almost a decade spans more than 6 years of teaching experience at IIM Ahmedabad and Indore, apart from non-profit international research experience with IWMI and corporate manufacturing experience at Saurashtra Cements Limited. He has taught various courses such as microeconomics, economics of the rural-urban divide, agricultural entrepreneurship, unlocking rural potential, rural marketing, agricultural input marketing, agricultural warehouse management, agricultural finance, project management. His course titled Managing Sustainability, developed and co-taught with Professor Turaga Rama Mohan at IIM Ahmedabad, received a global mention for the Page Prize in Sustainability Curricula. His research has involved studies of various grassroots and other institutions, adaptiveness, and agribusiness with a special focus on agri-entrepreneurship. His research pursuit is also to integrate sustainability, livelihoods, and entrepreneurship for the development of the nation and poor masses across the globe. His work has been published in various fora, including peer-reviewed journals, industry and international expert reports, and also popular outreach, etc. He has pioneered at looking at adaptiveness in grassroots institutions and also in studying entrepreneurship in irrigation in India. He also has in-depth expertise in rural marketing and marketing of rural products. He is currently involved in a research project that seeks to establish solar irrigation pumps in rural India.
No, that project is
CSR funding from GAIL.
completed.
He has also authored cases on BOP and rural markets. He has consulted with the World Bank, IRFT, UNDP, Government of India, to name a few. He is an academic advisory board member for the V School program on emerging economies and also an advisor for Kaushalya Foundation. So you can understand we have the best expert with us to discuss on today's issues. That is about farmers who are the economy saviors and warriors as well. So good evening, everyone. KCM, as you all know, KCM Connect is an IT consultancy services provider established an organization to offer customized software applications and solutions. So they would keep on pioneering and looking at such work with social intervention importance. So in order to begin this webinar, I'll just set out a few rules. All right. Now, for instance, the participants will not be allowed to switch on their audio or video during the running session. In case of any query, please use your chat window only to let the moderator know of your concern. I once again thank you all for participating in this webinar, and over to Professor Vaibhav Bhamoria, who is all ready to share with us his important insights and inputs. Over to you, sir.
Thank you and good evening to all. And thanks for joining today. I was given this topic, which is, sort of very close to my heart. But, I'll start with the bad news first and the good news will come in the presentation. I'm not really going to position the farmer as the economic savior and warrior. I'm going to talk about real life things, and I have been a Maverick professor mostly. I usually, sort of talk about stuff that is on the real ground rather than, sort of theoretical models. And that is where, sort of what I'm going to talk about is going to be very different. And in line with that, I would just like to start with that when we talk about the farmers, we need to understand that usually one of the major issues that we have in understanding farmers, we talk about them in isolation of the markets. So we want to see them only as producers, but we never see them as suppliers to markets. And that is where, sort of a large amount of, things are not understood. So, sort of probably I would just like to show what was happening on the demand side in the economy just a little before, sort of this COVID struck, right? So I will just, sort of, if you can just, can you see the screen now? Hello? Yes? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
we can
so
see,
if
sir.
you see, this is the agenda that was given to me for the day. And you can see, so I'm going to talk about farmers, the backbone, the interstate movement, some of the agencies engaged in procurement, post-harvest storage management, functioning of farm sector, credit flow. But to understand all of this, probably what we need to understand is what was happening on the demand side in the economy before. So I'm just giving you a brief thing that is coming from newspaper reports. So if you really look at what was happening in December, yes, last year, we were looking at the rural sales, in FMCG were going down. And the revival, we were looking at the second half of 2020. We were not really expecting the revival to happen in the early half of 2019. So, so we didn't, and this is important because what was happening was this was based on something that there was increased internet penetration happening. So regional rural markets, they were supposed to be the hotbed of competition. So the growth in the FMCG industry over the last 7-8 years has largely come from the rural markets and not so much from the urban markets. And that is why rural markets are very important. And I will relate this to agriculture in a short while. Please bear with me. And what was happening was that the consumption appetite of smaller cities was now coming to the fore. And that is also where we are also discovering in agricultural products, the markets are slowly moving from the urban centers to a lot of these smaller cities which are developing an appetite. And that has already been happening in small ways, though not in a big way so far, but probably that is what is going to get accelerated by this COVID phenomena. Right, and that I'll tie this up towards the end of the presentation again. So what we were looking at is, we look at another report which came out in January, and there, they're saying that, FMCG sector was expected to grow at 9 to 10% growth in 2020, and most of it we were saying will probably likely to come, around in the second half, but now all of that seems to be going away, right? And actually, in the last week of March, we said that yes, FMCG sales were declining, not growing, they were declining, and we expected e-com to play a larger role. And yes, e-com is playing a good role. We think it is playing a good role, but if you talk to the e-com players, they are in a very bad shape. And that is very important because if we understand, it is easiest to understand, say an Amazon or a Walmart, they probably on the online things, they were selling something like 2,500 items per movie. Now that basket has shrunk and they're probably moving only 40, 50 items right now. And till the lockdown opens, probably the movement is not going to really go beyond 150, 200. So even before it touches 1,000 items that are going to move through e-commerce players, it's going to be very difficult. So the first thing we realize is that the consumption basket has changed totally. And FMCG, it's very easy to see because right now everybody is buying only the essentials. Very few non-essentials are getting bought. And similar thing has happened with, even if you talk to vegetable or, the fresh foods, vertical heads at Walmart and other places, then you get to know that what is happening there is people are basically buying only vegetables and atta dal. It has shrunk to just 6 or 7 products. What used to be a, something like 250 to 300 products is just 6 or 7 products moving right now. And so while it is fashionable to say that the farmer is the savior of the economy right now, but we must understand really what is happening to the sector in much greater detail, because a lot of it is not really understood, right? So rural contributes to about 36% of overall FMCG spends, and that is very important because this is probably where we're looking at rural incomes to come in very handy to get the whole economy moving. And so rural, gives only 36% of the FMCG stands, but its historical growth over the last 7-8 years has been 3 to 5 percentage points faster than urban. And this is why the rural is very important for the FMCG sector, right? So there. And yes, so just before COVID happened, food inflation we thought was getting back. So this is January, late January, early February, commodity inflation was back, and there was good news for the FMCG sector. I just, from here, I'll just shift into another thing that I want to explain. When we talk of farmers, A, we need to understand the demand side. The consumption basket is changing very fast and what is happening there. B, what we need to understand is this, thing that what I'm showing right now. If you just you need to look at what is happening to different type of farmers. Say, I'm going to divide the farmers in small, medium, and large, and I'm going to divide the products into perishable and non-perishables. And if you look at that, the perishables, I'm going to talk largely about vegetables and fruits, and there's a different behavior. So what has happened? The large farmers usually were into a contract, either a commission agent or directly they were selling to large corporates. And with the COVID and lockdown happening, the large corporates are not able to function. And because they are also dependent, and there are multiple things to it, why these large corporates are not able to function. A, the market was uncertain. B, they are highly dependent on labor, which is the other thing, sort of where so labor needs to travel and reach their workplaces, which is not happening. So a lot of these large corporates are finding it difficult. The supplies that we are receiving are largely the stock that we had. So the retailer usually doesn't have much space to stock a lot. So it's usually the WD and the depots, sort of where the stocks is still coming from and is now drying out. So probably we have about 2 months stock that is usually there, so which has survived. But the large corporate market is gone. So the large farmers are the ones who are probably the worst hit by what is happening to COVID. And in perishables, they don't really have a lot of facility to store it. The perishable supply chain is built as a throughput supply chain. It's not built as a supply chain that you move, store, move, store, move. It's built as you move it fast, because we have very little processing and we have very little, sort of storage for through the year happening. And the storages are all closer to the market and not closer to the farms. If you look at the medium farmers, they dabble with both. They dabble a little bit into the local markets, and they also dabble into, sort of get into supply chains. And so where they're into local markets, they are pretty safe. They're doing as they were doing, which is where the small farmers actually are gaining right now. They are doing business as usual because they were part of the local fresh market, which is still functioning very well. Yes, the farm prices that they are getting have declined, despite the fact that as consumers we might be facing that the prices we are paying for most of these fresh veggies have increased. So if that means, I'll explain that also. But what we need to realize is, because of a decrease in fresh in the price decline, the reduced cash flows are resulting to small farmers also. It's not that they are getting all the cash that they were getting. Right. The medium farmers are facing a loss where they were connecting to supply chains, though, yes. And in local markets, yes. So some cash flow is happening to the medium farmers, but not as much as they would be required to save or move from one season to the other season. Right. So let's keep this as this thing. And if you look at what is happening with the non-perishables, that is very interesting. Those non-perishables can be stored much more easily. So smaller farmers would generally hold them back, the non-perishables back, for self-consumption. So the data is that 44% of even the marginal farmers actually give around 40 to 44% of their produce into the market, which they will now hold back as savings, because I don't have cash to save, but I will save, sort of, they say the cereals and other stuff, especially food grains, I will save, because that becomes my saving for a bad day. And so their income is either no income or highly reduced income for the small farmer for non-perishables. In the medium farmer, local market, they are moving. Mandis have started functioning. So you are coming. So there's a delay of 2 to 3 months in the mandis. That is happening. So mandis are working out, and that is happening. But the medium farmer can hold out a little. So the price decline and the loss that is resulting from there is definitely is there. Large farmers, they have to hold. They are holding because the price declines. So they don't want to go there. They have some capacity to hold. But they have been forced to take a long-term position, which has increased their risk, because we really don't know how long-term and how the price movements are going to happen, right? So this is broadly, sort of where whatever I'm going to tell is going to come from, and sort of then I'll just start with one by one. So let's look at, we usually try and say that farmers are the backbone of the food supply chain and savior during the crisis. So just look at, sort of what really are we talking about. So we're really talking about some 140 million, sort of farm households, which is roughly, sort of would, sort of be total to about 700 million people, which is almost, sort of a little over 50%, 55, 60% of our population of the country. And we are talking about this population when we talk about a farmer, sort of what it encompasses. It encompasses a whole variety of different farmers, but we're talking about roughly 55, 60% of the population of the country. And now what happens is that if these people have food, then the government and the agencies which are dealing right now with the relief operations, they don't have to provide food supplies in distress to these people. So if our farming sector keeps on working well, and the harvesting happens, which was due for harvesting when COVID and the lockdown happened, then what happens is your relief operations become much more easy because a large part of your vulnerable population has enough supplies. So that is where it eases the pressure out of the administration and the government. But does it really charge the economy? I won't be, jump onto saying that yes, it is going to charge the economy. Yes, but definitely this is the only part of the economy which is moving right now. That is for sure. Apart from say healthcare and sort of manufacturing of PPE kits and all that, which is also moving, and medicines. This is one of those things which is moving. But but really to expect that it is doing a great service, I am not so sure. Right. And if we look at, so what has the government really done? So we have raised the wage rates for Narega. But is Narega happening on the ground? Because only when it happens on the ground and the cash moves, that is when stuff really starts happening. That is when really whatever linkage that we were talking about, the demand side, rural economy, 36% to the FMCG, those linkages sort of they start moving. So rural doesn't become an engine unless until you put cash into the economy. PM Kisan has been held, and approximately 2,000 rupees have been promised, and they have gone to many accounts. But come to think about it, what does really 2,000 rupees do for a family in a rural area? Right, that is what we'll have to think. And if I were a poor person in a rural area, what would I do with 2,000 rupees? Right, so first thing I think, so what I would do with 2,000 rupees or whatever cash I have is, I would want to save a little bit of cash, and I would want to quickly convert into food that I can save. So now if these are the people who have food security, then a large part of this 2,000 can actually be saved, and some part of it can be spent on consumption or buying sort of necessary inputs for the incoming season. And that is where we see that sort of too much of fertilizer movement has happened, or seeds have reached, and the input sector on the whole seems to be doing well for the Kharif, right, which is the incoming season. Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana is now in agri term and crop loans, a moratorium was announced for 3 months, but we must realize this is only for the institutional players. Mostly farmers that we're talking about, medium and small farmers, they're dependent on the NBFCs. NBFCs still very recently did not have the facility of a moratorium. They have got the facility of a moratorium very recently, just 2-3 days back, and they're still figuring out how it is going to be rolled out. So that is again something, sort of how cash or how the finance is going to move into agriculture is still something that, we need to figure out. And we are not very sure, and there's definitely a delay. And if there's a delay, probably Kharif sowing is not going to get affected, because at least the placement of the inputs is there and there are some supplies moving. But will the Kharif season proceed as per plan, or will the cash delay sort of delay some things in the season? That is something that we have to wait and watch. But on the whole, what is happening is the farmers are now have a huge opportunity that the middlemen are not able to play the role that they have been playing usually. So the farmers have, wherever they are doing this, they are selling directly to the people. And that is where, how I would put it is that the farmers have an opportunity to fulfill the dream of Dr. Kurian, that farmers need to market their products themselves and control the value chain. That is when they're going to make the best use of it. And that is where an opportunity exists as of now. But are we placed to make use of it? I'm not really sure, because most of us had not really seen this coming. And while we always thought, sort of that we are going to get a huge opposition, and we were always planning that we have to fight against the opposition and win the war. Over here, it's a very different scenario. There is no opposition and you need to fight the war alone. You don't even know who your enemy is now. And that is where a lot of these organizations, farmers, collectives, they're not well placed to take use of this opportunity, because they have never had a connect with the consumer. So, sort of it's a very new business that they're getting into, and they're finding it difficult, right? But that also spells out that what we need to do is that, sort of if we can find better marketing models so that farmers can sell directly to people, yes, it gives farmers cash and economy. If cash goes to farmers, that 36% rural markets that we are talking about starts moving, FMCG starts moving, the basket becomes wider, and then the economy, yes, we can save it. So we need to find ways to put cash. I will come a little back to this cash and the farming household a little later again. All right, so let me just sort of talk about this thing. Yes, what is happening really with the intrastate and interstate movement, which is very important. So farmers have been able to produce, yes, they have been able to harvest. Now, how have they been able to harvest is interesting, because if you look at it, the combined harvesters, if you look at the data in India, so we have an annual market of say about, sort of 7,000, 6,500, 7,500 harvesters every year. Each harvester works for about 700 hours per annum is the upper limit, and so the total market in India would be between 5 lakh and 7 lakh harvesters, for if we say it was being used on the all the land in India, which is not the case, right? So we actually have a lot of harvesters, and wherever the mechanization need is very high, the harvesters are localized in there. So like I live in Kashipur, large farms around in this area. It's an important wheat and sugarcane area. So at least one of the farmers in almost every village owns the harvester. So none of the villages sort of really had a harvesting problem that initially people were saying how harvest will happen. Secondly, what happened was, since the nearby urban employment was not available, and as such it has been happening over the last 1.5 years, there was a lot of local labor available to put into harvesting. So the harvesting didn't stop, and the harvesting has happened and gone ahead, and which is what we are seeing is right now that the mandis have got the supplies and things have moved and they have worked, right? So this thing has worked. Now what is happening with the intrastate movement is happening, because sort of the best thing about agricultural machines is that they cannot be used for other purposes. So when they go out, and these people, when they move around, the policeman doesn't have any business to stop them. The machine itself is proof that I am not going for any other purpose, right? So the movement was easier, and as soon as the government said that yes, they are allowed to move, the movement started, and that happened. The other thing that is beautiful about India, which does not happen in other nations, is most of our these harvesting and other machine businesses are frugal. So what usually happens in a harvester is, the guy, if you see, the harvester comes with a khatia and a motorcycle. So the guy virtually, it's his living home. So the business place, his office is also his living home. So he moves around with it, which basically means that he doesn't need permission to move around a huge army or people. So if he's on the machine and the machine is moving, sort of the whole thing is moving, and he goes to a new place and he can do it. So the harvesting and other mechanization things haven't had really been a problem, right? And which is very important to note, because sort of it makes the harvesting and other functions go on, right? So if you look at what has happened to the procurement and MSP operations, then the government agencies, sort of, if you look at them, right? So the government agencies, sort of, they have no issues with permits, passes, and other things, but their issues has been with, sort of, three things I would say: vehicles, labor, and social distancing. Social distancing in a market yard is very difficult. At the same time, yes, at the time of entering, it is very difficult, but thankfully, a lot of these people were coming from places where, which were not, sort of infected or were exposed. So social distancing, even without social distancing, at least for this season, it has happened. Next season, it may be an issue. Vehicles, well, to the market yard, the farmers, large farmers, and sort of the local commission agents, they manage it. So that was not such a big issue. You don't really need big trucks. Tractors are good enough, which are there. And labor, what has happened is a very interesting phenomenon that has happened. If you realize, in these mandis and other features, you need unskilled labor. So the labor was pretty quickly substituted by the local labor, and that is how the mandis have functioned and things have happened, right? So that is why, if you realize that a lot of these MSP and procurement operations, they have gone ahead, and that has happened. They are delayed, because initially when the lockdown happened, lockdown 1 happened, that was the time when things were happening in central India. Lockdown 2 was when things were happening in North India. So people were a little uncertain initially, but as soon as the clarifications came and agriculture operations were allowed, they moved. And so, sort of the arrivals at the mandi started, and that is when the procurement and other, sort of things could happen. And largely because the private traders could not move, they took some time to move. So the MSP operations and all things, the processors have been giving some very interesting information, and they're saying that what really has happened is that the that the raw material prices for what goes into processed food and processed products, that has decreased. That has decreased because sort of there was an uncertainty whether these processors will be able to function or not. So MSME processors have benefited. They have benefited in a big way. So like local place, you're not getting the supply of Haldirai namkeen, but you are definitely getting the supply of a local namkeen at your retail shop. Now how that is happening is the local MSME guy does not rely on migratory labor. He has his labor staying sort of around his processing plant, and with very minimal labor he is able to sustain. And that is how these small processors are working, and they have worked out. Raw material prices have gone down, so they are finding the market very lucrative. And where they were earlier, they had to compete with the Haldirams of the world. They don't have to compete now. It's an open market, and that is where they are doing very well. And that has helped sort of some parts of the agriculture and agri sector to move from the farm to the processor seems to be working, right? And that has happened. And this is a very important thing that has happened, and that is how sort of the market mechanism is also working. So it's not only the government procurement and MSP, but the market mechanism is also working at the farm gate level, right? Yes. So over here again, what is happening is, so the farm price is falling for perishables, and consumer price is increasing. Now why that is happening is because the supply chains beyond the processor are fractured. And because of this fracture, what is happening is, so now these small players that I'm talking about, these MSMEs which are able to function, they usually cannot go outside the state. They find it very easy to go, sort of intra-district and inter-district. But sort of they don't have the connections in place. So what is happening is, that is usually where the trucks and all get stopped, and the police people, they may be asking for bribes at some places, especially in North India, not so much in other places. So that's an issue. So that is where it is happening. And so there are some wastage, because most of this, sort of the perishables, they need to be, sort of taken out fresh and fruit, and, taken out smartly and within a time period. So there's a lot of wastage that is happening of perishables between the purchase and the sales to the consumer. So like I would earlier go and buy, vegetables every day. Now probably I'm going to buy vegetables when the vehicle comes or when the thing is there. So I'm going and buying once in a week or once in 8 days. So there's a clubbing. And now, sort of, because most places what is happening, even in green zones, you open one day one side market opens, and all that is happening. So, sort of the wastage has increased, and that wastage needs to be accounted in the price, and that is where the consumer price is going up, right? So while the farm prices are falling, right? But yes, but the largest thing has been that now almost wherever it has been successful is the farmers or the collectives of farmers, they are selling directly to the consumers. And that has worked. So wherever, sort of you had the institutions in place, the farmer collectives were in place to put them together and sell, that has worked. Like Kaushalya Foundation has been able to, sort of buy something like, they've been able to ship around 250 tons, I think so, since the lockdown started, of vegetables from the farmers. And that has moved out, sort of. And so if you are in Calcutta now, probably the vegetables you're getting at many places are coming from Kaushalya Foundation. So we've been able to do. But in Andhra Pradesh, the Raitu Bazaars and the whole setup of that was there, created by the Society for Elimination of Rural Poverty and all. Those are the things, sort of, which are supplying to the large cities. Again, the co-op in Nasik, they have been functioning well, which is why, sort of Bombay is receiving its vegetables and all that stuff is happening. So, but it's now where they're taking the middlemen are out, and they now need to go directly to the consumers, right? So, as a whole, what is happening in the farm sector, I'm saying is that it has its head above water, but it is not booming. And why it is not booming is because the corporates, which were supposed to be bringing capital into the sector, they are facing issues. They haven't really started operations at the scale or in the way they were doing earlier. So that part of the supply chain of the agriculture sector, which is considered to be most profitable, hasn't really started moving. And because that hasn't started moving, right, it is not, sort of so easy, sort of that things are moving, right? And what is happening right now is that entrepreneurs are, forced to think of shutting down. And it's a very bad time for agricultural entrepreneurs right now, Because what has happened is your primary products are moving, especially on the input side. Fertilizer seeds are selling, but sort of top-ups of fertilizers, growth enhancers and other stuff that were doing earlier in a business in which a lot of entrepreneurs are coming up, they are not selling. So what the farmers have done, they have brought things together. They have stocked up their fertilizers and seeds products. And because they have cut down on expenditure of secondary products, the entrepreneurs are facing the brunt of it, right? And now what has happened in the supply chain is what we need to understand. So this is where it's very interesting. So the farm sector is functioning, direct sale is happening, but all the supply chain has been actually shrunk, right? So the supply chain has shrunk now, and what is happening? I produce here and I sell to the local person, but there's very little moving out. So the hafus from Ratnagiri is finding difficult. It's not going in export, so it's finding difficult to get takers in Bombay, even movement. So the hafus prices have come down for the farmers, right? And the other thing that is happening is that in the short to medium term, exports don't look to be a very promising market for two reasons. A, when we can export is going to be an issue. B, the premium that we were getting on exports, we are unsure that would be available if the economies in those countries itself is not doing well. Right? That is going to be a very big thing, because our whole thing on export is that we're going to get better prices in exports, which may not be very true. The other thing that is happening is that now, because there's very little cargo moving from one place to another on exports, the exports are going to be much more costly. So what is happening is that the international transportation charges have increased 6x over what they were earlier on a per unit of movement, because there are very few things happening. And what happens is that agriculture itself is the whole agri products, they are weighed by volume constrained, and they're unfavorable in the volume thing. And what that happens because of this is the cost of agricultural exports is going to increase a lot. And if that increases a lot, then we have to figure out how do we take, right? So that is going to be there, and I'm a little unsure if exports is going to be a big market, right? So we'll have to work it around our, we'll have to, work around the domestic markets. But there also, a lot of changes are happening, and we have to figure out, how these changes are happening, right? And what is happening is, now what the biggest concern that I have is that, the agriculture sector has a very low rate of capital formation even before the COVID. And now if the incomes are going to fall and institutional players are not the major lenders, and the NBFCs are finding it difficult because they have recorded losses for the delay that has happened in declaring the moratorium, that losses are still going to come on their books of accounts. So that is where I am worried that the capital formation in agriculture may not happen at the rate it is required to really make it the engine for growth of the economy, right? And yeah, and so yeah. So if you look at it, the moratorium on NBFC is not there, and we need to figure out that the large farmers who are who actually take a large part of the credit that goes to agriculture, they are the ones who are the worst hit. So agriculture loans are probably going to get hit. Credit is going to become to agriculture is going to become less fashionable, though there's going to be more government thing. Also, the institutions itself, which are lending to the agri sector, they may not be doing their other sectors if they don't do well, and we can expect them to be more conservative. And if they are more conservative, then really innovative agriculture, and where agriculture can move into growth phases, may not take the amount of credit that it is taking. And that is we are looking at small farmers with their very different facet of this, and why this is going to happen. I expect the medium farmers to face a crisis in medium to long term due to the institutional supply of credit, and the disrupted supply chain itself is going to disrupt credit as well. Because, and what is special is, because the fashionable thing of giving credit to agriculture was that you buy that you get into a supply chain like Renuka Sugars. So Renuka Sugars gives you the credit guarantee, and when you have to make the payments to the farmers, that is where you receive the payments back. That is the model on which most of the people wanted to work, and they were working, and they found out those things. Now with the Renuka Sugars and the corporates of this world shut down and finding it difficult to survive, that is where a lot of this credit model itself will need to be updated, and it's going to come under stress, and that is going to happen, right? And that is where I this thing now. A different but a very important part of it, what we need to realize is, what is happening in the rural area. Now look at the connection of the rural area to agriculture, right? So yeah. Huh. So if you look at, sort of what needs to be done, what we need to really understand is that, sort of since 2012, 2014, more than 50% of the rural income does not come from agriculture. It comes from non-farm and off-farm sources. And this is very important to understand, because what it means is that in most places, agriculture used to benefit from the cash flows or the income that the rural households were getting from other sources of income. Either by saying that these other sources of income took care of their cash expenditure, and the seasonal investment sort of expenditure was taken care of by agriculture income. So you earned out of one season and you put the money back into the next season. Now this is going to be difficult, because earlier what we are saying, the hypothesis over here is that in most places cash was moving from non-agriculture to agriculture, but now there's a high chance that at least in the short term or for the next year to come, cash may move out of agriculture into other consumption needs of those households. And if that happens, then agricultural, sort of investment and capital formation is going to fall. And I don't really see much of agricultural infrastructure happening. It's just going to be routine, sort of sowing and doing things. So I don't see agriculture being able to make the progress that we wanted it to make. Right? That is going to be difficult. And so what I think, so, sort of need to revive the rural economy in a big way, not just agriculture. So we need to focus on how the government, sort of really puts cash into the hands of rural households and revive the non-farm and off-farm, because that is the way our agriculture has been functioning for quite some time, and that is the way out even now, right? Because sort of the consumption basket has shrunk. And if the consumption basket has really shrunk, right, and then, sort of consumption basket has shrunk, then, there are very few crops moving, and obviously the prices are not going to go high. And, sort of that's a difficult thing. And so, sort of we need to revive the rural economy and not just, sort of depend on agriculture for it. Because Narega comes in very useful, sort of aware. Narega can be a very useful instrument to put cash into the hands of people. Narega combined with DBT becomes very effective over here. Like Karnataka has done a beautiful business. Karnataka has started using Narega in a big way. Andhra Pradesh is now slowly trying to do it. They are starting on it. And that is how, sort of, if money moves into the rural areas, we can, expect the rural economy to revive. And once rural economy revives, then what happens is the longer supply chains start for the corporates and the FMCG sector. But at the same time, coming back to the demand side, what is happening is we need to notice people have moved. People have moved in big numbers from where they were to where they are now. So there's a demographic shift and a geographic shift happening together. In terms of what is happening is we are going to probably see a large amount of occupational shift. People are going to change occupations, especially the lower BOP segments where the fight and competition was happening for economic growth, because now we are a consumption-led economy. So if we look at the shift of demography, geography, and occupation that is going to come in, combined with that, we will expect that consumption basket changes will come from the consumer side as well as from the supply side, because we haven't figured out how these three things have moved. The demography, geography, and occupation shift has happened. And so, sort of we can't really move in a big way, right? And so we are going to need to reconfigure our supply chains as well as business models to survive in this scenario. It is not going to be easy. So anybody who's working this out very quickly needs to make sense of, sort of these demographic shift, geographical shift, occupational shifts, and do business. That's the only way to survive right now, right? And so, yes, I am seeing a lot of entrepreneurship opportunities. Though I said currently the entrepreneurs who were in a stage of starting up right now are facing a lot of challenge, but way ahead, yes, exports are a way long off. I expect to see a shrinkage in exports. Premiums are going to reduce, but yes, in the agri sector, which was highly, the market barriers were very high, especially in the food sector. The barriers are down. The barriers are down, so easy entry is possible into markets right now, and probably for another 3-4 months. So if somebody can move into the markets in this 3-4 months, it's going to be very rewarding for them. We need more new localized business models. So the cash economy in local circles needs to work. So we need to probably go back to the Gandhian system and look at how cash can be moved in local economy, because remittances and other things are not going to happen. Domestic remittance as well as, sort of international remittance is going to be very much down, which has been a very important pillar of our economy, right? And so we used to, right, and that is not going to happen. Plus, to bring the cost of transporting agri products down, we need more and more hybrid business models of agri plus non-agri being traded by either the same person or the same supply chain carrying both agri as well as non-agri products. That is going to be critical, because being a weight by volume challenge product, we really need to focus on the transportation costs now. And that is where a lot of innovation and more business models as both, technical innovations will be needed, right? Yes, so how can be done right now is because we are having more localized market connections between the producer and the consumer. This is the best chance to introduce crop diversity, which in the long term can pay us much more. So we can probably, sort of, this is probably the best time to introduce crop diversity in many areas where we have been facing, natural resource problems. We can tide over that if we can do this. We can start preparing for climate change. This is great for structural change in the sector. If we can do this, yes, we can, combine this crop diversity to prepare for climate change, which is probably going to hit agriculture in the next 10 years or so. So that process can get started right now. So if I have a long-term vision, and yes, we will need a lot of resources, and the resources probably need to come from the public sector and the government, and not from the private sector as much. Would not be possible, but yes, we need to tweak our policies to make this happen. We need to exploit Narega in a very different way, and reclamation and other active farms include, look and really work for soil as our sort of savior more than the farmer. And we need to focus not only on food but also on non-food to make an impact, because the non-food items are sort of where a lot of, they're not FMCG, but yes, a lot of profit comes to people. Again, I'm going to come back to more hybrid models, agri plus non-agri. New credit lines from government need to be opened to sectors and to parts of agri that we have not really been servicing so far. And they need to come from the government, because the institutions themselves are compromised in between and they won't be able to give to agriculture. And we need to design new infrastructure for inflicting change in subsectors. Dairy is compromised. Dairy is facing a lot of problems. And if you look at poultry was already in a bad shape before COVID struck. And so poultry is in bad shape. So dairy, poultry, we need to find out those sectors and need to do something for them, right? I think so. That's where I'll close, and I'll be open for questions now. Sure.
Thank you, Professor Bhamoria, for such rich insights and taking us through this entire discourse. We could learn about so many things which we were probably unaware of. And now we'll move over to the Q&A session. We have a question from Ms. Ekta Sinha. So if she could just introduce herself and ask the question right away to Professor Bhamoria. Ms. Ekta Sinha.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to know that whether privatization of this sector would result into some great yield. Though I have very limited knowledge of this sector, but if you could answer this.
I would say, sort of we generally tend to think the sector is incentivized by the government schemes, but it's a sector which is largely still run in the private mode. There are very few public players that you get to see in the agri and the food sector, right? So while there are big names like FCI and there, but large parts of the sector on the consumption models or even on the production models, every farmer is a private player, right? So there's hardly any public production. Also on the consumption side, if you see whatever sort of we buy are largely sort of again coming from the private sector. So this sector already is one of the most highly privatized sector. But yes, what has happened in the sector, especially food, is the entry barriers were very high, and it closely resembles, sort of there's a very interesting diagram that I don't have up right now, but how 10 companies basically control almost 80% of the food sector of the world, not just India, right? And
Yeah.
that is where the barriers are going to go down, and there's a chance for Indian brands as well as local brands within India to make a killing. And so, what it would require is a new thought process of finding ways to bring capital, knowledge, and competency to these small players that can only take them ahead. And if any one of these riddle is not pieces of the puzzle is not put in place, then the issue there will be that the yield that we are thinking we are going to get from this privatization is going to be short-lived, and very soon we are going to go back to where these corporates are doing or these MNCs have been functioning. And there I don't really see, sort of because for them the way it worked earlier was much better. So they're probably only going to exploit lower labor charges based on this, because everybody wants more companies to move in now, invest. So a lot of labor laws are going to be compromised, and I will only see, sort of on as a whole on the society to have much worse effect than the good effect.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your question, and thank you, sir, for answering. We'll move over to our next question from Rajiv ji. So Rajiv ji, if you could go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much, sir. This is really insightful session for entrepreneurs like me who are into technology field. As you mentioned that during COVID-19, farmers got chance to sell directly to the people and fulfilling Dr. Kurian's dream.
Yeah.
So how ENAM, that Electronic National Agriculture Market, the IT platform of central government, is helping them? Is it in line with the dream of Dr. Kurian and eliminating middlemen? And my question is how entrepreneurs can fill the gap by maintaining Dr. Kurian's dream. Will it be same as Amul model, where cooperative work?
Yeah. Okay. So ENAM basically, sort of the issue there has been ticket size, and that, while the rural community is becoming digitized, is moving towards higher digitization, but, sort of it's not really a community that really does a lot of digital business as of yet. And that is where, sort of ENAM has its, sort of, what I would say, it has its, sort of limitations in the inroads that has made to this thing. But if you go back to the matrix that I had said, right, shared initially, then there if you see the large farmers are the likely ones who can probably make use of ENAM right now, because they are forced to get into hold their commodity and then get longer. So they definitely can use ENAM to get into, sort of contracts. And as soon as the movement of commodities can happen for them, those contracts can be fructified. So for them, it could be very useful at this stage, right? The small holders are getting into local markets, and so slowly the large holders and a part of those medium, sort of farmers, they can probably make use a lot of ENAM. But again, what happens with ENAM is just, sort of again marketplace. So who's buying there is going to be important. So unless until we don't have the large buyers coming and buying there, the ENAM really doesn't function the way it is. I as a farmer can take my produce, but I need to have the buyer there. So it's basically a contract is being signed right now, but we need to figure out how do we make it worthy of the price that the consumer can pay, right? Because if the transportation costs are going to increase, right, then this contract is more likely to be not honored than to be honored. Yeah. right? And where entrepreneurs come in, so exactly these problems that are coming now around ENAM and even through direct selling, I think so entrepreneurs come in a big way. So as the chains become more localized than longer chains, there's a huge role that entrepreneurs will have to play. I'm not even saying that they can play. I'm saying they will have to play, right? So
Thank
there's
you.
a huge opportunity now. And what probably a lot of people are going to decide, I remember on social media, there's a very famous photograph going around of Mahesh Jewelers selling atta, right? And I believe a lot of entrepreneurial people are going to now look at this sector who have not looked at the sector and discover that, the sector has long-term potential, if not short-term potential.
Sure,
Right. So
sure.
I am definitely seeing a lot of entrepreneurial activity. So, sort of, I'm a medium farmer. How do I connect to ENAM? Right. So a small app makes it possible for me. Small tutorial somebody gives me, sort of it becomes very useful. So how do sort of now, if I as a consumer need to buy, how am I assured of the quality of the produce that this local guy is giving me? Earlier, the brand used to be my proxy for that quality. Why did I buy Ashirwad Atta? Because it comes from ITC. There's a quality associated with it. All right.
Right.
So now so a lot of those functions, sort of that is where entrepreneurs can do a lot of good to this thing. The traceability. Because as soon as you move from longer chains to smaller chains, the brands in the MNCs, they survive because, we put faith to the chains. You are buying an Amul milk because, okay, there's a clean milk program and there's a basic level of hygiene happening. Now, if you have XYZ milk coming, how do you get that faith that it has been treated in the same way that an Amul has been treated? So that is where sort of I see a huge role of entrepreneurs that can happen and that can influence. And there I would also see sort of entrepreneurs. What is right now, it has never happened in Indian society. So now this is where I'm flying kites, right? But
Right.
there's a possibility to work out models where not only the producer or the supplier, but the consumer may also want to spend a little bit in finding out which product is better. Right?
Sure.
Hello,
Thank you, sir.
Professor. My name is Chandrasekhar.
Yes.
Rajiv was kind enough to introduce me at the beginning of the session.
Yes.
I have two questions to ask you.
Yes.
One is that you have just now spoken about branding the product. Will food processing sector has a good future, and if as a matter of policy, if government encourages or gives a lot of incentive to food processing, it will be beneficial to the farmer, as well as it will have a very good effect on the entire supply chain. That is number
Yes.
one. Number two is that has corporatization of agriculture, has it a future or not at this juncture? Because large corporations can simply buy future output of the entire farm, like what's happening particularly in place like Himachal Pradesh and Kashmir, etc. They buy out the entire crop right in the beginning, and the farmer is definitely benefiting. If
Yes.
there's an incentive for this alternative model, will our farmers benefit in the medium term?
Right. So I'll take this one by one. So yes, definitely branding and food processing sectors, they need to be there, sir, because again, sort of, how do I develop this thing? Sort of, so we are finding, so a lot of people are now talking about local brands that they're consuming, and they're discovering that the quality is not very different from the brands that they were earlier consuming,
Yeah.
right? So that innovation is gone, but now 100 more brands are going to come. So I'm again going to have that cognitive dissonance, which brand should I choose, right? So there again, branding is going to have a role to play. Food processing becomes very important because I say, I would just put it across from a supply chain perspective in a very simple way, that what happens is that the volume perspective for agriculture product, any agricultural product is always weighed by volume, unfavorable for transport. So the easier thing is if you can process it. So generally processing has always been done to increase the shelf life. I would always advise that if you can process it in a manner so that the weight by volume ratio changes, then sort of the transportation cost can be reduced and you can explore much more markets, right? And there again, I think so, sort of food processing comes to the fore. So, and we will now need to discover many different reasons, sort of that we are already discovering, that we now need to be much more aggressive on for food processing. So food processing for shelf life increase, food processing for, sort of transportation cost reduction, food processing for fortification. Fortified foods are going to be much more fashionable. People are going to shift to foods that help their immunity and health, and all that is going to come into focus, right? So a lot of that probiotics is going to come in. So how do you do food processing for probiotics? So there are many different specializations that food processing can very easily get into. And now, plus then what happens is, sir, from there, the corporatization angle itself comes up, sir. Because what happens is that if I'm saying in the supply chain, the production is becoming costly, the production is happening, the transportation is becoming costly, and the consumption, again, sort of there's an uncertainty on the market risk involved, because my population has shifted, its consumption basket has changed, right? So then because of that, what is going to happen, the easiest way is if I can work out economies of scale or scope on the production side and bring the cost of production down. So that is again going to be focused. So now I can again either bring the cost of production down, or I can increase the production. Either way, right, sir? I'm going to do that. So if that focus happens, I think so corporatization becomes very useful, because of corporatization here also solves another problem. For an institution, it's going to be very difficult to figure out which farmer to give credit to, which farmer not to give credit to. But if there's a corporate entity, we go back to the Renuka sugar model, and then there's a capital inflow into the sector can happen. So I would definitely see, that corporatization to have a good role to play.
Thank you.
It can actually do a service to the sector, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll take our last question for today, and it is from Mohammad Shamshad. So if you could please go ahead and ask your question to Professor Bhamoria.
Thank you, Professor, for enriching session. I would like to bring your attention on micro.
I'll just give you in.
Yes, Shamshadji.
Small and marginal farmer. If you see last 5 to 6 years, gradually tribal farmer dependent on market for seed fertilizer, it's enhanced their productivity. But due to COVID-19 and last hailstorm, they badly affected their rabi crop, and they erode a whole their saving. So they have no surplus for investment for Kharif. And as well as you also talking about NRGS, which is a hope through this, they would mobilize 3,000 to 4,000, but it would not sufficient for investment and survival.
No.
So what would be the alternative to mobilize investment for such small and marginal farmer?
I think so, sort of, there's actually a huge possibility for a lot of impact investment entrepreneurs to come up. We have seen impact investment for social obligations or social objectives is popular, but impact investment itself from a lot of investors moving ahead, which in turn, sort of works like a mutual fund and then again invest into, sort of say such farmers, right? That itself could be a game changer. But really, sort of what I'm talking about is very, very futuristic and innovative. And for any run-of-the-mill NGO or agency to do it is going to be extremely difficult, because it has shades of securitization in it. Suppose I'm going to give this capital to say 1,000 of these native farmers. Not all of them are going to get the same productivity out of it. Now, what also happens is generally we want to give agricultural credit at a cheaper rate. And in rural areas, you rarely have opportunities for consumption credit available. Everybody wants to give credit for production. Nobody wants to give credit for consumption, more so to the native people. Because generally it is believed that they will drink and they will do something and they will do it, which is not the complete reality. But then, sort of what happens is agriculture becomes the cheapest source of capital. So by default, what happens is I will seek capital in the name of agriculture, but use it for my most immediate need. And so there, sort of these agencies need to find out ways how to make this credit secure, right? And if you can make this credit secure, then it is easy to sell it off this portfolio to, say, a person who's doing an impact investment and finds it worthwhile to invest in these farmers. All right. So that, I would say, is the most ideal solution. But till that doesn't happen, yes, let us look at what has happened with oranges for a moment. So which is the district in India which grows the highest number of oranges? So generally, sort of somebody who doesn't know agriculture in detail would say that it is Nagpur. But that is a long way off. More than 10 years now, the largest orange producing district in India is in Rajasthan. And it has only one railway station, and the half railway station is in Rajasthan and half is in Gujarat. And it is very interesting. So in 1983, this project started, and the government put money on and paid the farmers to plant, sort of these orchards. And that is how this it has transformed over a period. So government money was paid in a way to make these farmers work on their own orchards, and that is how sort of they work. And now this district is a very, very important supplier of oranges to North India, as well as the best coriander that comes in New Delhi comes from that district. So that is another way in which government investment, if we have a concentrated plan, right, which is sort of more area based rather than looking at a larger region, can be worked out, it can work much better.
Thank you.
I hope I was able to answer some of it.
Some extent, not fully.
Yeah.
But thank you for bringing some new perspective.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Parvez, for putting up with the question. And thank you, sir. We are indeed, we wish to express our heartfelt gratitude for joining us on this session and helping us organize such a beautiful webinar with all our audience. We also thank them for joining in and being so much interactive and enthusiastic about the whole process. Before we end, we would also like to highlight our sponsor for today. It's the Indian Assembly of Youth. It's one of the oldest society and NGO of India, started by UNESCO awardee, whose first patron-in-chief was the first president of the first Vice President of India, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, and it is working towards eradicating unemployment in the country. So thank you all for coming on board with KCM Connect. And thank you, Professor Bhamoria. We look forward to meeting you again on some other similar issues. So do connect with us on live Facebook and other social media platforms, and do keep a watch for the next sessions which are going to come up in the next week. So thank you all. Thank you, everyone. Over to our host for today, Rajiv ji.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhamoria. Thank you for being our esteemed speaker. And with that, we will end this session.
Thanks a lot, everybody. It was nice being here. Thanks a lot.